And we're live. Thank you again for joining us on another episode of an as of yet unnamed podcast. We are joined by myself, Faerhad Targaryen.
And Al Rogers.
Cool. Now, thank you again for joining us. Last episode, we talked about a movie based on a true story about Ted Bundy, starring Zac Efron, Shockingly Evil. While I gave it a 7 out of 10, which I think, actually, no, I gave it an 8 out of 10, which I feel like was a little bit generous. Now after the dust has settled, I do agree with your rating of that movie a little bit more. But that was that.
7 out of 10.
Yeah, I think that's more reasonable than the rating that I gave it. But I thoroughly did enjoy your choice for today's episode, which is The Ruthless, known in Italy and its original name, Lo Spietato, direct translation to The Ruthless. This is another Netflix original starring a pretty famous Italian actor, Riccardo Scamarcio, I think I'm saying that right, and the actress Sarah Seraiocco. So this was interesting. I'm frankly not sure if this was based on a true story or not. And just like you, I watched this just a few hours before we started recording, and this was your choice. So what was your initial thoughts when you first saw it? You saw it for the first time about a week and a half ago, right?
Yeah, so that's right. I last saw this movie about a week and a half ago. And how I came across the movie, of course, it's on Netflix, so it's just kind of browsing through. But I've been trying to diversify the different kind of movies that I've seen. So I wanted to look at a movie, one, in a different language, and I wanted to kind of expose myself to the underside or criminal side of a foreign country. And I think this movie does just that. So before we begin, do you want to say spoiler alert? Spoiler alert.
Yeah. Always forget to do that. Yeah. Spoiler for those who are listening. We are about to talk about the whole movie, beginning to end, basically every important detail that leads up to, everything that happens in the movie. So if you have not watched it, pause this, go watch it on Netflix, then come back.
Or learn a little bit about the plot and see if it's really a movie that you'd like to see, and then go back and watch it, because for you it'll be an entirely different experience, and it is a roller coaster ride kind of movie. Strongly recommend it, and you'll see why.
Yes, so I do really love me some crime dramas. So American Gangster starring Denzel Washington, that's one of my favorite movies. Scarface being another one. So I was excited when you told me about Ruthless at the end of last episode. So this movie...
So did you... I take it you saw the similarities in this movie and American Gangster.
Yeah, I did.
Okay. So before I recommended the movie to you, I was not aware that you were a huge fan of American Gangster and Scarface. But I should have caught on to that, as you do have a pretty popular video on YouTube with Scarface. So I should have caught on to that, but I'm glad you enjoyed the movie. So what was your overall take on the movie?
So part of it, to me, did kind of drag, and this is towards, I guess, the second act going into the third act. Part of it did start to drag, but then it picked up, obviously, as I saw where the movie was going. And the particular scene I'm talking about is the outburst where his wife cut off all her hair to atone for his sins, and then he ends up being a little bit abusive, like he just smacks her out of anger. So I didn't see that coming, and that kind of elevated where the movie was going for me. Before that, it was starting to get a little bit boring, but I want to talk about it from the beginning, because again, I'm not sure if this movie was based on a true story or not, but it starts off with them setting up the movie. I mean, the main character, Russo, is the one who is narrating the movie, and the movie sets up with him having what looks like a pretty asshole of a dad, who introduces another Italian family to them, and they're all supposed to celebrate New Year's together, and he decides to skip out on it, and then throughout the events of the night, he ends up in juvenile jail.
Yeah. So this is really where the very beginning of crime dramas, that's really where the movie is either made or broken for me. And I think where the movie starts, looking at this young man's childhood and looking at some of the characters that he was involved with as a teenager, um, one, it's character development, but two, it really sets up the tone for the rest of the movie. He was a ruthless teenager, and he grows into a ruthless adult. But those early scenes of him and his co-conspirator grabbing young teenagers and dunking their heads into the toilet to pledge their loyalty to him and his little gang. I think those scenes help to really set up the movie and develop Santo's character to be this menacing, ruthless person that he fully becomes.
That was some grimy shit too. When I was watching that, I mean, it started off with him first. Like he had to experience it, and he didn't take any shit from them. But there was like literally like dusts of shit in the toilet because they had the camera in the That was grimy, man. Oh, so and then he kind of flirts with the nurse in the prison, or the prison or the nurse flirts with him, or something like that, something of the sort.
Don't forget that was more of a dream scene.
Oh, both of them?
That didn't actually happen. No, remember he was dreaming that portion up, and then it cuts to some a rather graphic scene where the young teenage version of Santo is kind of masturbating.
Yeah, on the top bunk. Yeah.
Yeah. So just so that there isn't any confusion. Yeah.
Okay, because
that didn't actually happen.
you cleared it up for me, because I was under the impression when I watched it that actually happened, and he was just jerking off about it later. So I'm glad you cleared that up for me.
Yeah.
So that's what actually happened. All right. So that's the thing. I mean, the reason he ended up in jail was because of false charges, right? Like he was, I guess, making out, him and a friend of his, they were like making out with what looked like possibly some prostitutes. The cops show up and they say that the mini-ped, or the bike that was right by them, was stolen.
Right.
They weren't the ones who stole it, but the cops think that they were, and that's the reason they got arrested. Then when Russo tries to call his dad, just being angry that he flaked, says, "No, I don't know anybody by the name of Santo Russo," and just hangs up the phone. And then he ends up in this juvenile jail for what, 10 years? Because he comes out of the jail as an adult. Am I interpreting that right?
So that part wasn't very clear to me. I don't think he spent all of those 10 years in juvenile detention, but rather that was the movie's way of saying a significant amount of time had lapsed, and then this is where he is.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a little more sense than what I thought. So, and there are other things about the movie that did kind of confuse me a little bit. So, there was that scene where he reunites with that same girl that his mom and dad were introducing him to way back on New Year's. They give a year, like every big event, there a huge year, like, in big letters, appear on the screen. So I don't remember.
Right. So that is something that the movie does. The movie does move rather quickly as far as the movie's timeline is
pacing
concerned.
Too, yeah.
But it covers his childhood all the way through to, I want to say he was 40, 50 towards the end of the movie.
Yeah.
So pretty significant chunk of Santo's life. Again, Santo being a fictional character who starts a life of crime, develops a criminal empire, and so you see the rise and fall of this empire throughout the movie. But so the young lady you mentioned, she and this happens in the character's 20s. The same young lady that he ignored as a teenager is the same young lady that he ends up getting pregnant and having a future with.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure you also caught on to that.
I did catch on to that. The scene where they reunite is the part that kind of confuses me because he recognizes her as the girl he knew from that he met from way back when, but also in that scene he sees his brother, and he walks over to his brother with like a huge cut on his cheek, and he's like, "Who did this to you?" And what confuses me about that scene is that the first time he's seeing his brother in all that time as well? Or like has he been seeing his family in between that time? Because there were no scenes in between of him and his family. So I would think that, at least he would be like, "Hey, I haven't seen you in so long. You've grown so much, blah, blah, blah." But that
Okay.
wasn't properly established either. So I was just a little bit confused there if that was the first time he saw his brother again in a really long time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think how that worked out is that Sanso had spent his time in the city away from his family, dealing with crime and criminal activity. Um, so, because prior to that, there was that his first couple of successful heists where he's really proving himself as an established criminal, and um, which is why his family, when he reunites with his family and he sees that criminal that had told him about the jewelry heist, that he's able to make that connection, and um, it, it's a continuation from that. Um, but I think you're right in seeing that there was some distance between him and his family.
Yeah, that was the only part that was, well, one of the things
So,
about the movie that confused me a little bit. But yeah, that scene with the heist, I mean, at least where they dress up as cops and then they go in and they steal all the
right,
jewelry.
right.
Um,
So one of the reasons why I enjoyed the movie is that it had a lot of it had a lot of original heists and heist ideas, along with it also capturing some uh, the whole fictional drug empire that Santo goes on to lead. Um, it I think that whole scene where they dress up as cops to go perform a jewelry heist. One, it was entertaining. Two, it was clever. Three, the scene is a bit of a roller coaster, as in it builds suspense. You don't know really where it's going, and then police officers show up, and it's it's a fun scene, and you don't know really where it's going until it ends.
yeah, I like when the cops showed up and the guy outside with the ponytail. By the way, the guy with the he didn't have the ponytail for the entire movie, but he was probably my favorite character for this for Lo Spietato. This guy, because he was chewing the gum, and then the cops show up. He starts ringing the bell,
Yeah,
and Russo and the other guy inside is like, why is he ringing the bell right now? But then eventually they leave. Also, while they were in there, one of the guys, his other guy, who was also his cellmate in prison, that's how he became part of the whole gang. He started beating one of the guys, one of the jewelers inside of there over the head with a pistol, basically pistol whipping him. Do you think that guy died or was he just knocked out? Because he was covered in blood after that.
yeah. He was covered in blood. And it's I think that scene lends itself to some realism, in that when you try to knock somebody out with a blackjack or a pistol, it's very likely that they're not actually just gonna get knocked out. Not especially not with like one hit, as is very common in many movies. Um, yeah, you're gonna actually have to knock them out unconscious by continuously pistol whipping them over the head. Um, not an easy thing to do, and it was funny that the movie included that. Um, so, have you seen any other works with the main character, Santo, in it,
I
or
don't think so. Okay,
just the actor,
so the
Ricardo
Ricardo
Scamari?
Scamarcio. I'm looking on his Wikipedia page for everything that he has been in. Right now, it doesn't look like he's actually in John Wick 2 and John Wick 3, which just came out recently. But I'm
Okay.
afraid I have not. I do not think I have seen anything by him. No, have you?
So just John Wick 2. Um, I haven't seen John Wick 3. That is very hot on my to watch list.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, but it's yeah. When as I was watching the movie, I was like, wow, this is a very familiar face.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure exactly where I had seen him, but he is one of the main characters in John Wick 2. Um, and I foresee this actor going out and performing in many more movies. Um, so overall, I think he did a phenomenal job in the Ruthless,
I agree.
and
So yeah, I
so
would venture as far as to say one of the best things about the movie is the main character's portrayal or the acting by the main guy. I'd say that's one of the highlights of the movie itself.
so there were a couple of love interests in the movie. There was his wife. There were and then there was that art lady. What did you think? What did you think of that? What did you think
So
of her?
I thought when they introduced her in the scene where they're at the car dealership with the ponytail guy and a client shows up and then she shows up and crashes into his car and then Santo intervenes, right? So that's how basically she's introduced. And
Yes.
she was portrayed as someone, at least the way I interpreted it, was that she was being portrayed as someone who is kind of street smart and wouldn't just fall for this guy's antics in terms of him hitting on her and trying to pick her up. But eventually they do hook up, right? So when I was watching it, I found that a little bit predictable, because he did say at one point, and this wasn't like a line in the movie. This was, well, it was a line, but it wasn't a spoken line by him. It was him, a narration by him. He says something along the lines of, "I don't follow the rules of honor" or whatever, and this eventually picked up to him, culminating in him cheating on his wife. And something like that is something you see often in characters like this, so I found that to be a little bit a cliche, not something I was entirely a fan of. In fact, there was also a
Now,
scene.
is that truth though?
It happened in
And
Goodfellas.
let's just talk about American Gangster here for a second. And it's been a while since I've seen it, but spoiler alert for American Gangster. Um, does Denzel Washington's character have have an additional relationship in that movie? I
Frank
don't think so.
Lucas, no, he does not.
Okay, okay. Does Tony Montana have a second uh have a second relationship out there in Scarface?
Absolutely not. But Ray Liotta's character in Goodfellas does, and so does
Yeah.
Pablo Escobar in Narcos. Although that's also
Okay.
based on a true story, so I guess
Which
we can't really compare to that. But this is a
okay.
yeah, this is just another
Which
story being told in the form of a movie. So that's why I'm saying, oh, I've kind of seen this before. So it was almost kind of predictable for me, but it wasn't entirely bad because it did make for good storytelling because his wife continued to be a very important character in the movie, right? And we started seeing her descent into depression and denial because she did start to see a therapist, and Russo was recording the sessions that she had with the therapist. There was even a
yeah,
scene.
I thought that was very interesting. That and it also seemed to me in those scenes that Santo knew that, or rather, the therapist that was providing Santo's character um, therapy sessions, that he was aware of the recordings. He was doing the recordings for Santo, and that I've never seen that before, as in a drug dealer or criminal empire mastermind having such influence and such control over his spouse and those around him that he's actively recording what she's thinking as she's telling it to a therapist in order to anticipate um, her moves. And I was like, wow, huh, that is not something you see, and that is an absolute power move.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think had he actually paid attention to those recordings, he could have gotten away with so much more, but he didn't, and it was part of his undoing. Um,
Well, I think it was maybe I didn't pick up on it as much as I could have, but I thought that was just him trying to cover up his own tracks to save his marriage, because he stopped the tape at the same time as we're seeing the scene with her talking to the therapist. Eventually, he asks her, "Do you think your husband is cheating on you?" And she's like, "How dare you? He's an honorable man. He wouldn't do that. I've had enough of this." And then she gets up and leaves. And I think that's where the recording ends. So I think Russo's mindset is, all right, I've been covering my tracks well enough. She doesn't suspect, so I don't need to do anything more about this. That's the way I interpreted it, but perhaps there was more to it than that.
but even in her character saying that, I think at that point, really, that scene was there to show just how in denial she was.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Um, and I guess Catholicism or just being faithful was very important to her because, like we were mentioning earlier, she cuts off a lot of her hair to atone for his sins. Then she sells a bunch of valuable shit she has upstairs, which makes him go ballistic, because he's obviously not as religious or religious at all like she is. And then he says
So
to her,
so there's even a scene before that that really sets up the religious piece and what religion meant to both Santo and his family, his extended family, and her side of the family as well. In that, so after he sees her at the party and they get reacquainted, and he starts sneaking into the room at night and gets her pregnant.
yeah,
The reason why he gets married, and I think there were two or three lines there where he says, "Well, after this, I pretty much had to marry her,"
yep, yep,
and I think
yeah,
I think that line and those scenes set up the idea of honor, the sanctity of marriage, and the sanctity of religion that both cultures have. So, um, so there was no question about it um, that for her to even think that he was cheating on her, there's more to it. It's not just him cheating on her; it's him. It's Santo dishonoring her, dishonoring his family, and absolutely that is not something that she was willing to accept, both mentally and physically. So she was absolutely in denial, and she would never actually admit to that. So it absolutely explains her actions during the therapy session that she has, where she clearly states he's an honorable man. He would never do that, because that was the foundation of their marriage. So
Speaking of, well, I mean, we're talking basically about adultery now. The woman, the artist that he cheats on her with, well, I mean, her being that woman, his mistress. Another scene that kind of confused me, and this at the end of the scene is when she says to him, "Marry me." And in order for him to do that, he'd have to divorce his first wife, I think. But he had just gotten done murdering, I think, what was their accountant, right? I mean, someone who works for him, right? Because he found out that they were just that guy was just making moves behind his back. So
Mhm.
This person was someone who sold out his other friend, the same guy who was his cellmate when he was a teenager. That guy had to get killed off because he was turning into a junkie, which turned him into a liability. He was thinking that he would be the one to murder the accountant, whereas Russo himself murders the accountant. He commits that murder. Then he goes over to the artist's home, and there's this show going on of the artist's friend who was just sitting making a pose with no clothes on, and
Ah,
yeah, Russo walks
okay.
up to him and beats his face in, and then everybody claps. So was that planned or what?
Yeah.
Because nobody's really
So
horrified.
it wasn't planned. However, remember what the artist first said when he first met him? It was he was explaining himself to be this concept of a person,
Yeah.
and that the art, and that he himself isn't an artist. He is a concept. He is art, um, and that through art, his only goal was to inspire. So the scene where he gets the shit beat out of him. Oh man, I loved every second of that scene. Because here's this man who's so full of himself, gets his face beat in, and he accepts it. And he accepts it because that is his goal. His goal is to inspire and motivate people. And he motivates and inspires Santo to punch his face in.
Yeah.
And to not and and if the artist were to reject that, then he would be rejecting the very essence of who he is. So that whole scene works on so many levels. Um, I was quite pleased with that scene.
All right. So yeah, that was Russo being Russo, the only thing he knows how to be, which is ruthless, and beats this quote unquote artist's face in. But the confusing part to me, well, there's one thing and then the second thing, and I'll get into that later. But the first thing is, if that wasn't planned, then was all this show really supposed to be a bunch of people staring at this naked guy sitting and making a pose? How is that supposed to inspire anything for anything?
Exactly. I think that really what he was trying to do was, I guess, it show the absurdity of art. I mean, it was just a naked man in the middle of a room, people looking at him, trying to decide whether or not um, this thing was worthy of discussion. And
Yeah, and
it,
and I
it
don't think it.
it's art,
Yes.
right?
Well, anything can be art, but I do agree with you that that guy was just kind of full of himself and thinking that he could inspire people by, showing himself off like that. Those people didn't really seem inspired looking at him. They didn't seem, to have any sort of inspiration or feel influence from him until Russo showed up and started punching him really, really hard. Then he walks away, goes onto the roof or wherever, the balcony, and his mistress follows him. The first thing she says is, "What were you thinking? You could have killed him, or you almost killed him." Then, right after that, she says, "Marry me. I know I can make you happy." And that part of it does not really sell me much because what exactly was it about, Russo that made her fall in love with him? And then eventually his wife meets her and explains more. But at that point, what exactly was it about him that sold him on her? You know what I mean?
Sold. Yes. So I think, if you look at what Santo enabled her to do, it was clear that he was of great benefit to her. She was a poor, not a student. She was a poor artist, um, and Santo was lavishing her with money and gifts. And um, I mean, if you look back at the scene of how she was introduced, she was driving a pretty beat up vehicle,
Yeah.
and yeah, what that relationship was. Um, Santo, all he cared about were really her looks, um, and all she cared about was his money. Uh, and pretty that's pretty typical um, for these kinds of movies. So in that regard, this movie doesn't improve on that concept. But I don't think it detracted too much from the movie because she was really hot. And
Yeah, I agree that this movie has, done a few things that other movies have, which is fine. Every single movie does not have to come up with some brand new original concept to pull into the table. I mean, movies are being made with, ideas and inspiration from other movies. That's fine. So yeah, I think that part of it was fine, even though it was kind of expected, this whole mistress thing in general. And now that you mention it, giving in some backstory. I do remember like that scene that we were talking about earlier when his wife was waiting in the therapist's office for the next therapy session. She was reading a magazine, and in there it said something about the artist and the businessman, and that was him and her together. And that,
right,
yeah, that
and
may have.
that's how his wife found out about the whole thing, because it was published. Um, but when you think about something like that, it's like, what are the chances? What are the chances of that actually being of a person being found out like that?
Uh, I mean, if it were in magazines, then it would probably at some point be on TV too. I mean, this was the 70s, 80s, and early 90s that the movie takes place in, so they never really showed much of television being watched in the movie, but I'm pretty sure, television was there. So, but you're right. What would be the chances? But if it's showing up in magazines, it's like tabloid journalism at this point. So, gossip, pop culture, this played a part a little bit in whatever town of Italy all this was taking place, or the part of Italy, province of Italy that this was all taking place in. So that happened. He also had two children with his wife. The first of which, when he made her pregnant and then decided to marry her, then went to jail for the second time in his life, I think. But his wife at some point was trying to be sexy, try to become sexy, or show off as sexy for him, and he never comes back home to her, I think, and that was that same scene in which he's hooking up with the artist for the first time. But his wife at that point becomes so depressed. There were scenes where she had his revolver and was attempting suicide. But she didn't go through with it, but it looked like she was so depressed that she was actually ready to pull the trigger because she accidentally blows one off and breaks her mirror.
Yeah, yeah, and I think really those scenes um, really help to capture the ups and downs of her relationship, and that's not typically something that the crime drama movies tend to capture. Which I really liked about Ruthless is that they fully captured her emotions, her mental state. You can see where it is that she has a turning point in her relationship and in her mindset, that she is completely fed up with trying to cover for her husband's behavior, her husband's actions, her husband's uh, criminal intentions, and um, where she actually gets a hold of her life and says, okay, this is what my life is, and now I'm going to take control of it. Um, so she had a very interesting character development, and yeah, not what you typically see.
Yeah, I did think that the actress did a really great job of depicting how she started off so happy and stayed ignorant. Ignorance is bliss, was happily ignorant about all the shit that her husband was doing until it started affecting her life, which was the adultery he was committing. And that's when it started to really affect her, and she couldn't ignore his bad habits any longer. And then eventually toward the end of the movie, we find out. I think what happens now. I did watch this movie Italian with English subtitles. On Netflix, there was the option to have English audio, which could have made it easier to follow through with the whole movie, but I wanted to watch this movie in its natural voice. You know what I mean? So I watched it with the
Yeah.
Italian dialogue with English subtitles. If I'm understanding the movie correctly, it ends with him, I guess, being kind of like an informant to save himself from more jail time and then being transferred to another jail where there are hardcore gangsters who want to kill him. At least that's what it sounded like, because there was this meeting that he and his wife had. This one scene where she said, I talked to a lawyer and he's going to get you a transfer. But when she tells him the name of the jail that he would be transferred to, he immediately recognizes the name, which housed gangsters that have been there for a long time, still had time to go, and wanted to kill him. So, if I'm understanding the end of the movie correctly, he becomes an informant because he's on tape, right, being interviewed, and he sells
Right.
out a whole bunch of other criminals. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, and that's what I got from it as well. The end almost happens very abruptly,
Yeah.
and um, and just the closing scene to the movie. Also, I couldn't make too much sense of it in that um, this is a scene in the movie where Santo addresses the camera directly, and he's talking about his next adventure, as in he's gotten away to a new town, and um, he's almost clear and free from his family, his old friends, and he's kind of looking at life with a very optimistic point of view. Um, but the camera focuses in on this other character that seems like Santo is going to try to woo over.
Mm-hmm.
It's a young lady, but I couldn't really trust her in that scene. I wasn't sure if she was somebody who might be able to catch on to who he is or who he was, and that taking a quick turn. So I'm not entirely certain about that last scene. I'm
So
not sure if that's what you got, but
I didn't
that's
read that much into it. I just saw it as first of all, I think it was in France because I think they were speaking French and they were introducing each other because they were both walking their dogs, and she was asking him where he's from. And you're not from around here, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm from Italy." I think that's how the conversation went. I didn't take that as her, being a double agent of anything of the sort. Maybe you're right in that, like she'll eventually pick up on who he was, but I don't think she had any other game. I thought she was just, meeting this new neighbor for the first time and getting to know him a little bit. And he was saying that she could be his new partner in his new life. And perhaps that's true. But that's exactly where the movie ends. And overall, I'd say I did enjoy the movie. But as far as crime dramas go, it's a little on the lower end for me, unfortunately. But it was still worth watching. So I'll definitely say that as closing statements, since we are nearing the end of this episode and going into ratings. This movie definitely was still worth watching.
okay.
Overall.
Let let let's jump right into it. So as far as closing statements, okay. Um, where do you rank this movie out of 10?
So pacing is one of the weak points I'd say about this movie because at times it did get a little bit boring. I would give it a 6 out of 10.
Wow, a 6 out of 10.
And I realize that's higher than the score I gave last episode's movie, but I'll admit I gave last episode's movie too high of a rating. That should also be
Okay,
lower. And this I'm gonna be yeah, I gotta be more careful with the way I make my
okay.
scores. This is a 6 out of 10 for
So
me.
so what else contributes to that score? Why
So
why 6?
the predictability, I felt like a lot of the movie did seem a little bit predictable and not a lot of fleshing out of characters. I mean, the portrayals were really well done, but not all of the a lot of the exposition done. It was done a little bit too quickly because a lot of different crime of the underworld was involved. There was kidnapping involved. There was just straight up heists and robbery. Then eventually they introduced heroin. Drug dealing. All of that was just from this to this to this. But there was, if you're going to cover the fact that this mafia has done all these things, I would want to see a little more exposure of it all instead of just a few scenes of introducing the fact that he did these things and not fleshing it out as much, if that makes sense.
Okay. That's fair. That's fair. So, would you watch the movie again? Does it have much rewatchability?
Yeah, I think I might want to watch it again. Like if I'm talking to a friend about it, I would say, this is a crime drama. If a friend of mine that I'm talking to, or just anybody who is into crime dramas and they wanted to watch it together, I would sit down to watch it again with them if they were down to see it. So, because I do think it's worth watching. And if I watch it a second time, I'll pick up on things that I didn't see the first time, which goes with any second viewing. So, that's me. 6 out of 10. What would you give it, Al?
I think a 6 out of 10 is fair. I'm gonna go with a 6.5 out of 10. I tend to rate movies a bit more harshly than you do. The movie was fun. I wouldn't rewatch it. I think it's a great movie if you're gonna be stuck in an airplane and you want to use the Netflix
Yes.
download offline feature.
Yes.
Fantastic feature, by the way.
Mhm.
Download the movie. That way, while the plane is busy taxiing out, you're already watching your movie. It's fun. It's a fun little adventure. It could be a longer movie with more details,
Yeah.
and I think it would be there could be more character development in that. But if you're looking for something quick, fun, crime drama, drugs, adventure, some nudity, it's the right movie for you.
Yeah,
So
I think you nailed it perfectly. Like if you're on a plane, this is a movie to watch on a plane on Netflix. Yeah, I'll agree with you there as well, definitely. So 6.5 out of 10 for you, 6 out of 10 for me. Roundabout answer. I would watch it again if somebody wanted to watch it. But as far as crime dramas go, I still like movies like American Gangster and Scarface more. As far as Goodfellas go, I was not a big fan of Goodfellas to begin with, but Goodfellas
okay.
as well is probably a little bit.
I know we didn't talk about Goodfellas, but just to give our listeners a reference, what would you rate Goodfellas at?
I'd have to
Off
see
the top
it.
of your head.
I would have to see Goodfellas again, but from the first time I watched it, maybe like a 7 or 8.
Wow.
Yeah,
That
I'm also not a big fan of Ray Liotta. Not saying he's a bad actor, but I'm just saying his movies in general, just him, because he's the main dude there. But I do like Joe Pesci, so that
Yeah.
movie I'd say is a 7. But
Right.
I'd have to watch it again to give you like a proper answer. But
When I think of movies like Casino and Goodfellas, I think high 8, low 9.
Interesting.
I really enjoy these crime movies.
Yeah.
And this one doesn't quite stack up because it's not as long of a ride.
Yeah.
Or like Wolf of Wall Street, that's a low 9, very high 8. Just so that you have an idea as to where we're coming from.
All right.
But okay, so talk to me about the next movie. So it is your choice as to what we watch, what we review, and yeah. So what are you thinking?
So this next one was really it was the movie everybody was talking about at the end of last year, but I don't think I ever talked to you about it. Have you seen Bird Box yet?
Birdbox.
Yeah.
Is this an animated movie? What is this?
No, it's another Netflix original based on a book starring Sandra Bullock.
Okay. No.
It's also
This will be new to me.
yeah, but it was a movie that a lot of people were talking about at the end of last year, going into this year, and people are really divided about it. Some people say it's good. A lot of people say it's bad, like bad, really bad. I guess I don't want to affect your opinion before you even watch it, but yeah, I want to see what you think about Bird Box. It's also on Netflix.
Okay. So Birdbox it is.
Yeah, so Bird Box. I've seen that movie twice. I wouldn't mind having to see it again, but as far as what I think about it, I'll have to save my opinion on that for next episode. But yeah, that concludes
Okay.
this episode of our As of Yet Unnamed podcast. This is Faerhad Targaryen.
And your boy Al Rogers.
Okay, so thank you so much for listening to us, and we will catch you guys on our next podcast. Take care.
Peace.